Hey, everybody, welcome back to this week's edition of the One's Ready podcast. I have a trigger warning for you, and you know that here, that's not something that you hear very often. However, in this case, it's justified. So I sat down with Seth Gale. He is an Army combat veteran that was in for 6 years. He served in GWAT and then got out and started a professional speaking and motivational speaking career. Now, I wasn't aware of Seth's story when we first started talking. I had done some research into who Seth was, and we'd shared some DMs. But you'll even see it on my face as we started talking through Seth's story, which he tells unapologetically. He tells in a very matter-of-fact way, and he does not hold back on what he says happened to him and how it forged him and how it sets him up for where he is now and what he's doing now. You'll tell by my face, like this is not only powerful, it's also jarring. It's also traumatizing to those that have been survivors of past traumas that are like Seth. But it's important to get out there and it's important to talk in real terms about his journey. So if you are a trauma survivor, if you're a sexual assault survivor, if this one hits close to home to you, you may want to prepare yourself for this episode because it does get very, very dark, but it's necessary because it's what we care about here at the podcast. Number one is helping and supporting veterans with stories like Seth, because he's part of the team now, and I will never not answer a message from Seth at Beyond the Shadows. That's number one. And then number two, so that we can get this word out there and that we can start breaking some of these stigmas, both in asking for help and then who are the victims of sexual assault, because there are a lot. So with that being said, without further ado, here is the episode with Seth Gale, myself. Seth is from Beyond the Shadows over on Instagram. So go check him out. Well, hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the team room. It's me, it's Seth. We're going to have a great talk here about some stuff that Seth is getting into. But first, I want to point you over to the website. Please go over to onesready.com. Check out the stuff that we have there. Not only do we have great deals with all of our partners that are on the site there, we've got our own merch. We've got everything that you need to get through the pipeline, but it also forwards you to wherever it is that you download your podcasts. And you can give us a review, like, subscribe, all that stuff. Glad to get that out of the way. Seth Gale, welcome, my friend. How are you today?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you?
Seth, tell us a little bit about yourself, man.
Right now I am I'm a husband, I'm a father. I have some hobbies. I do jiu-jitsu. I've recently got into ultra marathons. So I've done a few of those. I've ran like 5 or 6 of them in the last 7 months. I've got another one coming up here in a couple weeks that I'm trying to get ready for. Have not really been training as hard as I should be, but it'll be fun. So, but yeah, I'm writing a book right now. I'm writing a book. I'm a public speaker, motivational speaker, trying to help people overcome adversity and trauma and tragedy and just the hard parts of life that some people unfortunately go through. So that's my mission right now. I think I already said it. I'm writing a book, and that'll be out later this year. So that's my big push, my big mission right now. I'm a husband, father. I've got a couple little babies and an awesome wife to support me and take care of me in the meantime. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell, but I'm sure we'll get into my backstory and why I'm writing a book and all that.
Yeah, and it's a great time to jump into it. So, your Instagram is an amazing place to find you and to connect with you, and to see some of that story that you've already kind of put out there. It was really humbling when I was looking through, your account at Go Beyond the Shadows over on Instagram. So make sure to check Seth out there. But as I was kind of like doing my back research that I'm supposed to do for the show, and started going through and having a conversation with you, I was really taken aback about not only how willing you are to be transparent about some of your own past traumas, but your motivation to get in front of people that need your help. So where did that come from? Like, lay out exactly how did your path lead to where you are today?
Yeah. I'm doing this now because about 5 months ago, I started to listen to a ton of podcasts, just like a lot. And so I realized there was a lot of healing and hearing other people's stories. And I was already writing a book at this point, but I didn't want to talk about my story until the book came out. I kind of wanted it all to come out at the same time. But then I realized if I'm healing this much by hearing somebody else's story that's completely unrelated to mine, then my story, even though my story may be completely unrelated to yours or somebody else's, it can still heal and it can still help. So, yeah, I've in my book writing journey, I've actually deleted my book twice because I thought that nobody gave a shit. I thought that like my story is not that bad and it's not going to make that big of an impact. And then as I finally started delivering my message, people are kind of taken back. And so basically, I had a really bad childhood, and that's kind of where it all starts. It starts off quick. My mom, she had me and my two sisters back to back years. So like 16, 17, 18, 17, 18, 19, something like that. It was just like boom, boom, boom. And my father, my mom and my father got into a fight when I was about 2 years old. I was maybe one or two, and he ends up stabbing her behind the ear and nearly killing her. So he goes to prison for basically my entire, or well, I guess maybe the first 6, 7, 8 years of my childhood. I never knew him
Mm-hmm.
growing up for the first few years. And so that was already hard. When you're growing up without a father, you're already subjected to certain things, and you're already at a higher rate, a higher statistically, to be a drug addict, alcoholic, any of those things, right? Also, unfortunately, when you grow up without a father, a lot of kids end up, either sex trafficking or drugs or just bad stuff. So my mom was doing her best that she could, raising three kids. At least that's what I gathered from it, being when I was like about five or so. I can remember some of those days, not a whole lot of them, but we were at a babysitter's house, and I remember the babysitter had a son who was like 15, 16, and that was my first incident with being molested. And it wasn't anything like extreme as far as like this. This stuff's always bad. It doesn't matter if it's once or 100 times. It's bad no matter what. But all I remember from that was like exposing himself to me in his bed, and like kind of him touching me touching him. And I don't really have a whole lot of hate towards that situation. I'm not mad at the dude for it, because if he's 15, 16-year-old doing it to a 5-year-old, he's probably got something wrong with him, where somebody touched him or somebody damaged him in some form or fashion, and he is expressing that trauma, that damage out, and I just happened to be there for it. So I did report him. I do remember reporting him. We ended up telling my grandparents, and I know my grandparents kind of did something about it, but nothing really happened. We still went back to that babysitter's house, still was around that guy, but the molestation like didn't continue. That only happened a few times. So that it kind of kicks off quick with my father being gone, being molested around 5 or 6 years old, and then just growing up with my mom. She always smoked weed, she always drank liquor, and she always had a lot of good people in the house, a lot of different guys, a lot of different boyfriends. We moved around all the time. I was always a new kid at school. I moved at least once a year, if not 2 or 3 times a year. I can't remember actually starting at a school and finishing a school in the same year up until I was in like almost high school, which is kind of crazy, where some kids,
Right. Yeah.
are at the same school or maybe move once in their entire childhood. So I was always moving around, and once again, when your mom can't take care of you and you're stuck in babysitters, and there's just that lack of stability that children need. It's actually like very critical. So anyways, when I was around like 9 or 10, my mom ended up meeting this guy who was a pastor, and he got her hooked on crack and cocaine. And I remember going to this church and seeing all these people, and the guy was up there. He's this light skinned dude. His name is Jamie. He was a freaking asshole, but he had cornrows. Yeah, he had like he just I in my book I say he had a crooked smile, and what I mean by that is like when you looked at him, he's very charismatic and he was very well spoken, but like you could just tell the guy was a piece of shit. You're just and at 10
Yeah.
years old, I was like, this guy is not good. So he just had like this, you know, devious persona about him, but he could win people over if he could win naive people over. And at 10 years old, I could see right through the shit. And unfortunately, my mom didn't. And so my mom starts dating this guy, and at this time, she becomes very abusive. She starts to close hand, like punch my sisters and I, specifically my older sister and me, where it was a lot of, if she got mad, it went from like whoopings to just child abuse, like just straight up abuse. And so the physical things suck for sure, but the emotional damage, in my opinion, is what's way worse. And for example, there was a time where like my mom walks in my room and me and my sister are in there, and she like close hand punches her in the face. like hammer fist style, punches her in the face. My sister's head like snaps against the wall, and she continues to punch her. Maybe I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times. And I jump on the other side of the bed, and I was 10 years old when this happened. And I'm like looking at my mom. I'm crying. I'm hysterical because I'm just terrified. It was very sudden. And my mom looks at me and she's like, "What are you fucking crying about? Like, stop being a fucking bitch." And to hear that from your mother when you're 10 years old, that's a lot to process. And another example would be like 2 weeks later, 2 3 weeks later, I remember walking home from school, and I walked home. We weren't supposed to walk home, and me and my cousins took our sweet ass time just doing dumb shit like boys do. And when I got home, my mom was pissed, but she wasn't mad about like the concern or like, where were you? She was just kind of like, where the fuck have you been? Like the inconvenience to her life. And so she takes me up in the bedroom. I bend over the bed. She gets this like wooden paddle out that she'd always used on us, and she starts hitting me with it. Well, the first time she hits me, a lot goes through my head. And if anybody's ever been like especially the military can relate, or like first responders, or I don't know, anybody who's ever done like an intense job, it's crazy how much you can process in like a half a second or a second or 2 seconds. And so I remember the first time she hit me, immediately I was just like, okay, this is not good. And I kind of bounce off the bed a little bit, and she hits me again, and I fall to my knees, and she just kept swinging. And she hits me across my back like 3, 4, 5 times, and with this board. I fall to the floor and I'm crying. And instead of like making sure I was okay or loving me or checking on me, she's just like, get the fuck out of here. Like, go to your fucking room. And so I crawled to my room, and I'm laying on my floor crying and screaming. I don't really remember like being in that much pain. I'm sure it certainly hurt, but I was just destroyed that my mom like beat me with like no remorse. And so that that's what I mean with the emotional like trauma that comes with it, because getting whooped was not bad. We got whooped our whole lives, but when it started to become very much like get the fuck out of my face afterwards, or like this hate towards it instead of a learning lesson, then that's when it starts to change your mind and mess with your brain a little bit as a kid, where you're just terrified of your mom. And I wet the bed up until I was like probably 13 or 14, 15 years old, something like that, just from all the stress of living at home. And you're just terrified of going home, and and you don't want to be there. And because I didn't have a father and my home life was getting kind of crazy, I always had friends that were 2, 3, 4 years older than me, or either that, or it was like the biggest kid in my grade was always my friend for some reason. It's
Sure.
it's part yeah it's part of having like I guess they call it like a father wound, where like you're searching for that father figure, or that man, that role model. You're looking for the male role model. So I always had those friends that were just bigger than me. I don't know. So, anyways, this kid was, for the sake of the story, I'll say this kid's name is Jacob. He lives around the corner from me, and he becomes my friend, and we start hanging out. And he knows that I don't have a dad. He knows that my mom is kind of crazy. He knows that I need some help. So he takes me in. He's 5, 6 years older than me. He takes me in, and we start hanging out all the time. And he becomes like my best friend, right? And I'm over at his house, spending the night playing video games, all the good things. And one day I'm over there, and this guy walks in the front door, and this guy's in his 30s, and he is 6'5". He's 380 pounds. He's Hispanic. He's got he's Hispanic, but he's like white. He's very pale. He has the Dahmer like aviator serial killer glasses on. He's got this like
Sure.
slick,
Yeah.
yeah. So he's got this like slick back hair, and big ass dude. I mean, this guy looked like a left tackle, and but he looks friendly. He looks capable, like he could punch really hard, but he looks like a friendly guy. And so he walks in, and I'm like, hey, hey, what's your name? Seth. You like video games? Yeah, I love video games. You like football? Yeah, I love football. Um, and so he's like, well, do you want to come up to my house and play video games with us, me and Jacob? And I'm like, well, let me go ask my mom. So I go ask my mom. My mom says, hey, as long as you're with Jacob, you can go to his house. And so I remember going back, getting in his car, and he drove this white Honda Civic, and there was trash all over his car. Like the floor of his car was covered in trash. But when you're 10 years old, you really don't give a shit. You're just like, whatever. So I remember being in his car and like just kind of a couple funny things like the AC was blasting, and I think that was the first time I ever was in a car that had like some bomb AC, and you're just like, hell yeah, like it's not hot as hell while we're driving in the car, you know. So it's like these like little
Right?
weird things that you like cherish as a
Yeah.
kid, and so we're going to his house and we're like listening to AC/DC and Metallica, and I'm like, oh damn, this is like pretty cool. Like me and the boys, you know, like me, my friend Jacob, and this older guy, and we called him Mondo. That was actually what we called him. And he lived like 30 minutes away. We get to his house and there's 3 TVs, there's 2 computers, there's a big table in the middle. He lives in this studio apartment. So it's actually just one big room, right? With like a little kitchenette and a bathroom. And like I said, 3 TVs, couple computers, couple desktops, and a big table in the middle for like playing Dungeons and Dragons. I would end up playing that with him a lot. And in the back left corner, there was these like black curtains or these black sheets that were hanging from the ceiling. They were just like nailed into the ceiling or whatever. And that was his bedroom back there. That's where his bed was. So we get there and I'm like, oh damn, like this is badass. Like there was 2 or 3 Xboxes. Like you didn't have to take turns playing video games. Everybody could play at the same time. He would order pizza. We had pop, energy drinks, coffee. Like it was badass. You just went up there and played video games. It was just a fucking awesome time as a kid. And
Where'd you grow
so,
up to call it pop, dude? Did you grow up in
uh,
Ohio?
yeah, Ohio, yeah,
Yeah, you had to. As soon as you said pop, I was like, there's no way. You're from Ohio or Michigan, either way. And
yeah,
I don't hate you, so you're from Ohio. So I figured it out.
yeah, Northwest Ohio. I grew up in Lima, but this guy lived in Bluffton, Ohio, which is 30 minutes away. Um, but anyways, yeah, we get up there and we're
Got
drinking
it.
all the pop or the soda, whatever the fuck you want to call it. But um, freaking, I was just happy. It was a great time, and so it was an escape from my mom. And I'd go home Monday through Friday, and mom was getting worse and worse. Right, she was getting more and more abusive. Every time we got in trouble, it was just an ass whooping. And we ended up moving into this house that really sucked. So my bedroom, this last house I lived in with my mom, my bedroom had hardwood floors, and the hardwood floors were buckled all the way across. And what I mean is, if you're unfamiliar, like hardwood floors, if they're subject to like weather or water or anything like that, they'll actually crack
Temperature,
and snap.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they'll break apart. And so my whole bedroom, the floors were just like ripped up, and it just kind of felt like walking on rocks. The reason why I was like that is because my ceiling had a hole that was probably 2 feet wide, and maybe 3 or 4 feet deep. The entire corner of my ceiling was missing, and you could see straight into the attic above. Like if it rained and snowed, it was coming in my room. And we put this plastic tarp up and to try to protect me, but it doesn't really help. I remember sitting there looking at it at night while it's like filling up with water, and eventually it ended up busting one night and soaked my whole damn room, and it really pissed me off. I was like probably, I don't know, 11 or 12 when that happened. But in this bedroom, I slept on a little like maybe 3-4 inch mattress. I had a thin little blanket, and it was just a miserable time. My mom was really into the crack and cocaine at this point. So every single day, like clockwork, people would come in and out of the house. Just 20, 30 people a day would come in and out of the house. And they would come in, they'd go right to the back where our bathroom was, and they would be back there for hours. And I think for a while I was in denial that like there's no way they're actually smoking crack or like doing cocaine or any kind of hard drugs back there. But because it had always been weed, which smoking weed really didn't bother me. I knew I wouldn't do it, but that wasn't that big of a deal to me. But when they were in the bathroom for 8 hours a day and just high as hell, and they would come out and sit down on our couch and they were like zombies. And to be 10, 11, 12 years old and see this was just really hard to process. It's really hard to understand why these people were in my house and doing these things, and why my mom was letting this happen, why my mom was doing this. We were on welfare, we had food stamps, and she would sell our food stamps to get drugs. And yeah, it was really bad. So the home life was really bad. My bedroom sucked. I didn't have an escape other than going to this guy's house on the weekend. And this guy knew that. So I would go to his house every single weekend. Eventually, I was going up there by myself. Sometimes Jacob would be there, sometimes he wouldn't be. But I was basically going to his house every weekend, like 40 to 45 weekends out of the year. I was at his house. I ended up meeting his mom, his sisters, his family. I would go to his family events like Memorial Day, 4th of July, Christmases, birthday parties, all this shit. And he was this 30-year-old man bringing this little like 10, 11, 12-year-old boy. And nobody said anything. And within about 3 months of knowing him, so I was still about 10 years old at this point, he kind of makes his first move. I didn't realize I had been getting groomed this whole time. And he makes his first move where he starts to touch me. He had his left hand on my left hip, and I'm sitting on his lap. I used to sit on his lap because it was cold in his apartment, and this is probably part of the playbook of molesting kids. Is he had a cold apartment and he had one blanket, and so I remember being cold, and he's like, "Well, why don't you sit with me and we can stay warm under the blanket, you know?" And so I get on his lap, and it just becomes normal for me to sit in his lap all the time now. And like I said, the first time he touched me, he had his left hand on my left hip, and it kind of falls off and brushes my butt. And he says, "I'm sorry." I said, "No, not a big deal." I attributed it to like me and you bumping each other in the hallway. It's like, yeah, no big deal, right? So he puts his hand back on my butt and he says, "So this is okay." And right when he does that, I felt like I had reached the top of the roller coaster. You know, you hear that last click and you're like, "Here we go. Like, we're about to take this ride." And that's kind of how it felt, because I was just like, I froze up and I couldn't get off the ride. Like, I couldn't stop it. This was inevitable. Like, it was going to happen. And I just was like, son of a bitch, man. I knew what was happening. I knew I was just mad as hell, but I froze up. And so he put his hand on my butt. "This is okay?" I'm like, "Sure." And he holds his hand there. And I just knew where it was going. And, the roller coaster starts. And so from that point forward, the molestation would just get worse and worse and worse every weekend. It went from being like I'd show up at his house and we'd play video games for 4, 5, 6 hours or whatever, to I would show up and we'd play for 2 or 3 hours, and he would go back and lay in his bed, and he would he had this thing. It's really haunting to think about for me for some reason now, but he had this thing where he would lay back there and he had these big ass hands, and he would punch the wall as he's laying in his bed. He'd punch the wall behind him, and for me, it's almost like the dinner bell ringing, or like getting called to hell. Like, I felt like if I was going down into hell and the bell is just tolling and it's just calling me in. And I'd be out there playing video games and I'd hear him punch the wall, and I'm just like sick to my stomach because he wouldn't stop until I went back there, And it's like a psychological thing. It's just really, really bad. And I would eventually go back there, and for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours a night, he would lay there and say weird, disgusting things to me, like how much he loved me, how how much I meant to him. He was going to kill himself if I wasn't in his life. All these things, and when you're that young, trying to process that's a lot to handle, right?
Yeah,
So
you have
you're
zero capacity to even understand, what any of those things mean from an adult. Like, you can't be expected to.
right, right, and it was, dude, it was like I hated it, man. I hated every minute of it. I could never dissociate. I could never get out of there. I could never like put somebody else in the room for me. I was there. I was present. I was miserable. All I wanted to do was play video games and hang out. And all he wanted to do was basically have sex with this little kid. And every weekend it would just continue to escalate. Like I said, it went from him just touching me to eventually putting his hands in my shorts. And when you go through stuff like this, a lot of the sensory details are very, very much like in my mind still. I think it's the same thing if you hear like a real traumatic like war story. Guys remember the smell of the carbon or the engine or the rubber, or the senses are very in tune to what happened. And he had big hands. He had very rough hands, very rough calluses, and he would rub his calloused hands together, like his knuckles too, and it sounded like rocks. Like, his hands were just so rough, and he had these long nails. And so I remember what his hands feel like, just grabbing me and like touching me, and it's just something that I'll never forget that. I don't think, anyways, and I'm okay with that, but it just kind of sucks. Um, so yeah, that would he starts touching you, and then he's kissing you, tells you he loves you, and it just continues to escalate. He starts to want the reciprocation of the emotions or the affection, right? So now he's convincing this 10-year-old boy, 11-year-old boy to start touching him, and he's pulling his shorts down, and he's pulling my hand over to grab him, and oh man, I hated it. I hated it. Like I can't. Oh man, it was just disgusting. So when I was like, maybe 12 years old, I start going through puberty, and then he starts making comments about me going through puberty. He starts making comments about me having hair and growing and these different things. And he's like real excited about it. Like he's like getting more and more excited. And I remember him performing like oral sex on me, and that would reciprocate as well, where basically every single weekend he would do it to me, I would do it to him, and it was just fucking horrible. And the first time I have an orgasm was with this 32, 33-year-old man, and he's performing oral sex on me, and I'm looking down, and I remember like it all happening, and I'm just thinking to myself like what the fuck, man? Like what is going on with my life? Because when I go home Monday through Friday, I'm just dealing with more bullshit, and then Friday night, Saturday night, I'm dealing with this. So there's just no escape. I didn't know what to do, didn't know where to go, and the first,
And
like I
how
said,
you're what, 13 at this time?
I wasn't even 13 yet. I was like 12 years old when this happened. I was like,
Okay.
but the oral sex began. When I was still like 10. We're talking like within the first year of me going to his house, everything had pretty much escalated, almost to its full capacity, I'll say. So I was very suicidal at this point. I was, you know, Monday through Friday when I was at home, I would just like dream of like dying. I would just look outside my window and think to myself, like, man, if I just land just right, I'll die. But if I don't, I fuck this up, and then I gotta live with like a broken neck, and I'm not trying to do that. Like that's
Right.
the that's
Jesus.
the yeah, man. That's like the dark humor side of suicide. If you fuck it
Right.
up,
Yeah.
you're just an asshole. So I don't know.
Yeah. Can't even
That's
get
how.
that right, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yikes.
So yeah, so I was just like going through it, man. Like it was tough, and um, so to cap off my mom and my home life situation, when I was 12, my mom gets in a fight with her boyfriend in the bathroom, ends up stabbing him, sets his shit out, or yeah, puts his shit out in the front yard, sets it on fire. I was at my neighbor's house at the time. I walk outside and I see this going on, and I'm just hysterical. Like I know this is it. Like something tragic happened. I don't know yet. My mom walks out. She's high. She's running around yelling, screaming. She was always just angry. And her boyfriend comes out of the house. He's got a wife beater on, and he's got blood all over the front of his shirt. So the cops show up. They arrest my mom, and I'm standing there in the street at 12 years old, like looking at my mom in the back of this cop car, and I'm like, "What the hell's going on?" I'm sitting here crying and just, it almost. This is kind of what I think maybe death feels like. I was very like hot but cold, and it just felt like my blood was. I just felt like everything was leaving my body. I was sick to my stomach, and just it was tough. Despite all the shit my mom put me through, that's the only thing I had, and she was being taken away from me. So, like, I remember just looking at her in the back of this car, and the car is being pulled away, and I'm crying my eyes out. I just can't control myself. We go inside the house, and I can't really remember what happens from there, but for the next like 4 months, I just started bouncing around different houses. I was living with random people, friends, some family. I actually lived with my dad for like a month, but I almost got into juvie because I kept getting in trouble in school. So I left his house, went to a different school system. And it was just bad, man. It was just really, really bad. So, and during that whole 4 month period, this guy, Mondo, was keeping tabs on me, right? And he's picking me up still every weekend and still. So my mom was just taken away from me. I don't have a father who can take care of me. And I'm still getting molested every single weekend. And my grandparents end up finding me during that Christmas season. It was like maybe January or so when they end up picking me up, And they found me because my mom called me, and my mom calls me and tells me she's going to come and pick me up. I'm at this like random person's house, and I said no, like I don't want to live with you. And at 12 years old, to tell your mom that was pretty tough. And she's like, "Fuck you, you're my son, you're my fucking responsibility. I'm going to come and fucking get you." And I'm just like terrified because I'm like, dude, I don't want to fucking live with you no more. I want to move on. And I was the people that I was living with at the time. There was a full family. There was like a mom and dad. There was a couple kids there. I wasn't with my sisters anymore, but there was a couple kids in this house, and like they were like an average middle class family. I wasn't this poor kid getting my ass beat every day. So I told her like I don't want to live with you, you know, and those people actually offered to adopt me, but we didn't have any relation, so it probably wasn't going to happen. So my grandparents step in, they take me to their house. My sisters were actually there. I didn't know this, but my sisters were there, and so I get there, I'm like, holy shit, like what's going on? My grandparents asked if they want us to adopt us, and I say yes. My sisters say no, so my sisters go back and live with my mom, and I'm an only child now with my grandparents, which I was okay with. I was like, yeah, I don't care. Like, my grandparents are well off. They had a real big, nice house, pool in the backyard, food on the table. I wasn't, getting my ass beat. I had, it wasn't a hole in my ceiling. As a matter of fact, I had a whole finished basement to myself. So I was like, fuck yeah, man, this is awesome.
Right.
And so my grandparents took me in right before I turned 13. Um, and then on the weekend, I said, "Hey, I want to hang out with my friend." And you're just in this freaking battle of like, you're just trapped, and you just keep defending this guy and defending him. And every time somebody would say something like, "Why are you hanging out with this grown man?" It was always like, "Oh, he's not like that. He's not like that. He's not like that." And you just get sucked into this like black hole that you can't get out of. And so that's what I did with my grandparents. I told them like, "Oh, he's fine. There's nothing wrong with him." So he meets my grandparents. He makes my grandparents happy. He makes them laugh, makes them smile, and boom, he's part of our family now. And because he had met my grandparents, he would come over to my birthday parties. He would come to our Christmases, our Thanksgivings, and I would do the same. I'd go to see his family too. So now he's like deep in the woods, right, or deep in the weeds, and he's good. He's set. Like his parents like him, the kid likes him, the friends like him. We had other adult friends, and he would actually joke with these other adult friends that we would hang out with. He would never say this in front of my grandparents or like any family, but in front of these other adults, he would say, "Okay, well, it's time for us to go. We're gonna go back so Seth can blow me tonight, or so I can go back and I'm gonna fuck Seth tonight." And everybody would just like laugh it off. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, like, you fucking assholes, like, how, like, what's going on, man? Like, somebody say something, please, But
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't say anything. I mean, like, if nobody else is going to say anything, why would I say something? Like, once again, I'm like 12 years old, and I'm soon to be 13, and this guy is just everybody loves him. As a matter of fact, he ran a haunted house in his hometown. Bluffton, Ohio's got like 4,000 people in it, and his mom lived on Main Street. He would run a haunted house out of her front porch every Halloween, and every Halloween, all these kids would come through that town, and he would be at the end of the line handing out candy to every one of these kids. And I'm sure he's just scouting,
Wow.
looking for the single mom, looking for the kid that maybe looks a little damaged, looking for the next victim. Um, and unfortunately, around the time I turned 13 would be, I guess, he had finally hit his goal where he would eventually rape me for the first time. And, that's something that obviously I'll never forget, that being 13 years old and being naked on his bed. And I remember there's this jar of Vaseline next to his bed on this nightstand. And it makes me sick to my stomach to think about. But I just remember seeing these like deep scoops from his fingers because he would use his fingers on me for the last 3 years. So you see the deep scoops, and it's like a scar. Every time I see that, I'm just like, that's me. That's me. The jar is me. He's using that on me. And then it eventually happened where like I said, he raped me. So That whole thing happened, and I remember like him finishing and being done, and like just being exhausted. You could hear like the sigh of relief from him, and he was just happy, which is so disgusting to think about. But when he was done, I went to the bathroom and I'm sitting on his toilet, getting this shit out of my body, and I'm thinking to myself, like, man, like my life is over. Like this is the worst thing that you can possibly do to a kid, and I either have HIV or I probably have AIDS, or if somebody finds out, they're going to think I'm gay, or if kids at school find out, they're going to think I'm having sex with this old man. And this guy's plan was like he would tell me these things, or he would do these things to me, and then tell me, "We just got a few more years, and once you're 18, we don't have to hide this anymore. Like we can be in a full blown relationship." And I just did not want that, man. Like I was like fucked up, and I wanted to die so bad. But killing yourself is scary too. So it's just I didn't want to hurt. I didn't want to feel that pain of a gun or a knife. I just didn't want to hurt. And so that's probably why I didn't kill myself.
So,
Um
I mean, where do you go from there? Like, did you reach out to somebody for help? Like, how did you get out of this? I mean, obviously, it's the lowest part of your life. Obviously, this is
yeah.
what forged who you are now and affects you every single day. So, how did you find your way out of that situation?
Yeah, so it went on for a couple more years. I was about 13 when that happened, and right before I turned 16, I was a month away from being 16 years old. So at this point, it had been going on for about 5.5 years. And I was up at his house, and there's this younger kid who was my friend who was with me, and I see this younger kid starting to get groomed, and I had seen this for like the last like 2 or 3 weeks. But this particular night, he goes back in the bed with him, and I told myself like the buck stops here. Like I'm not going to let this kid get the same thing that happened to me, which is crazy to think about. Because if he had not been there, I don't know if I would have ever
Right.
said anything. I knew I could handle the pain, and I was molested and raped that weekend as well with that kid being there. But he goes back in his bed on Saturday night, and I actually was playing a video game on the PC, and I text Jacob on the game, and I said Jacob is the kid that introduced me to him, right, like 6 years prior. And so Jacob's playing the game with me, and I say, "Hey, man, I got to talk to you tomorrow." So the next day comes around. Jacob comes over to my house, and I'm pacing back and forth in my bedroom, and I'm trying to tell him. And Jacob's like in college at this point. I was 16. Jacob's in college. He drives down. He sees me, and I'm like, "Hey, man, I've been wanting to tell you this for a long time. Like, I don't know how to say this. Well, I can't say the words. I'm pacing back and forth in my room." And he goes, "Mondo touched you, didn't he?" And I just fall apart, right? I fall apart. I fall to the floor. The same feelings I had when my mom was taken away from me are those same exact feelings I had in my bedroom that day. There's like I had hardwood floors again, and I'm like punching the floors. I'm like ripping my hair out. I'm crying. I just did not want to be there. And obviously the answer was yes. And so I didn't say anything. The next thing Jacob says is he did it to me too. And I couldn't fucking believe it because Jacob is like, once again, he's like this male role model in my life. He's this, and if you have a brother or a father in your life, like they're untouchable. Like that guy's a warrior. He's tough. You can't hurt him. Like there's nothing that can hurt him. And so that's how
Right.
I looked at Jacob. And so to hear him say that he touched him too, I was just like, I looked at him. I'm like, what the fuck, man? Like what is going on? And he's like, do you want to report him or do you want to keep it a secret? And I was like, nope, fuck that guy. We got to report him. I was like, I cannot let this happen to my younger friend. So we go out, we tell my grandparents, we go to the hospital. And like I said, that weekend I was raped and molested as well.
Was this the first time that you've ever? I'm sorry. Was this the first time that you ever told anybody? Was it this
Yeah.
moment?
Yep.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, this was like, you want to talk about like fear of rejection and denial. And like, I fully anticipated telling Jacob and him being like, bullshit. You're like, you're
Right.
full of shit. Like, this didn't
That
happen. There's
yeah.
no
That
way he
fear
did
had
that.
to be. Yeah.
Dude, it was horrible. So we go tell my grandparents, we go to the hospital. And like I said, I was raped and molested that weekend as well. And I knew I'm at 15 years old, I knew that I couldn't take a shower, and I knew to not change my clothes. I knew that like I was going to get his ass. And so I go to the hospital and they're like, "Hey, do you have any clothes from that are in a dirty laundry at home, or do you have anything that we can use that possibly has his DNA?" And I told these nurses, I was like, "He just raped me like 12 hours ago or whatever, and I have not changed and I have not taken a shower." And the nurses, I think this is why it sticks in my head so much. The nurses were completely taken aback. They're just like, "Wait a minute, what? Okay, take your clothes off. Let's get test him." So they test me, they test my clothes, they find his DNA on my body, they find his DNA in my underwear, and I tell them there's some Vaseline next to his bed, and there's a towel that has his DNA, my DNA, and Vaseline. And so they go and the cop shows up. I tell this cop all these like very disgusting stories, very disgusting details, some of the same ones I've shared with you, but some that are much, much worse. And I knew that I had to tell the cop like the most horrific things that I could tell him, because in these cases, I didn't know this at the time, but I just knew I had to tell him the details. But in these cases, the more like egregious that the situation is, the harder they get hit, right? So I tell the cop as much as I can tell him. They go and get the guy. He basically admits guilt to a couple things, nothing, not all of it. He admits guilt though, so they arrest him. And about a month later, he pleads guilty to 11 counts and gets 10 years of prison. That was in 2011. So he would be free today to walk around and do whatever the hell he chooses to do. But fortunately enough, he died in prison in 2019. So he was about a year away from parole or being released, and so he applied for parole or whatever. He was denied, and then he died like a month later. And that was basically the end of my traumatic childhood experience. For the most part, I had a couple more bad situations in high school, but nothing like that, And I went home the next day and I was just like, okay, well, I guess I don't have any plans this weekend. And, I just kind of started to live a normal life where I started to hang out with kids on the weekend and do shit like that. But it was all a secret. It was all a big secret. It was all kept under wraps. Nobody knew about it. The, court and the legal system did a very good job at keeping it all a secret, and they handled their business, and you put the guy away. And I moved on, and that kind of led me into joining the Army. And the Army saved me in many ways, giving me some guidance and mentorship and leaders and stability in my life. And then I got out of the Army. I went to Afghanistan, and that was basically the catalyst for me to get out. I was kind of fed up with it at that point, or at least I didn't want to. I have a daughter and I have a son now, so I didn't want to. I didn't have a father. I didn't have a good family, and I wanted to be a part of that. So I was like, okay,
Sure.
I got my deployment done. It's time to get out now. Um, so I got out, got into construction, started helping a bunch of veterans out in construction. I won some national awards, which was really cool. And when I started winning these national awards with like construction and just veterans, this the National Association of Home Builders gave me an award um, out in Vegas. When I started doing stuff like that, I realized like, okay, this is kind of cool. And when I was on the stage in Vegas speaking to this room of like millionaires, I'm thinking to myself like, man, you guys have no idea how the road that
Right.
I've taken, the
Right.
road that I've taken to get here. And I almost like mic drop moment told them everything on that stage, but I didn't. And I kind of regret that, because that would have been a great opportunity to explain how much that organization really meant to me for helping me out on the way out of on the way out of the Army. So I'm sure I'll get another chance another day to do that. But anyways, after all of this shit that I went through and getting out and then being married and having a wonderful wife, two beautiful children, um, I've got everything that I never had as a child. I've like I said, won awards. I've made a ton of money. I've done great things, and I was still suffering. So this like whole sexual abuse thing, I just started talking about this like 3-4 months ago. Um, I just kind of was like ready to talk, and I was like, okay, I got to get this off my back because it's holding me back. It's holding me back in a lot of areas of my life. And after going through all that and doing the things that I've done in the last few years, I was like, okay, it's time for me. There's 8 billion people in the world. Statistically speaking, nearly half of them have experienced what I have. So it's not about me anymore. It's not about like the shame or the guilt or the embarrassment that I hold. It's about how many other people can I save moving forward? How many of these people can I reach and touch and encourage them to talk and to share their story? Or if they don't want to share their story, at least talk about it, at least begin their healing journey, because the last like 3-4 months has been just incredible for me, like life changing in many, many ways. And that's the reason why I get on stages now, and tonight I'm going to go talk to a rehab center. There's maybe like 20, 25 people up there that are going through treatment. And I was never an addict. I was never addicted to anything, but other people's trauma and their story has helped me heal. And so my goal is to go up there and tell them my story and how I've healed and overcome trauma and tragedy and things like that. And there's a beautiful life outside of all this dark bullshit, and so that's why I tell my story, and that's why I'm here now.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you, man. It's a little bit heavier than the normal One's Ready podcast. I think that's probably a truism, right? But I'll tell you what, it's important. How do you find the motivation to deal with adversity in the way that you have and still be hopeful? Because everything I hear that you're saying like is hope. Everything is about healing. You didn't lament, the 3 or 4 years of, insane abuse that I can't even wrap my head around, to be honest with you. And the next day you were just like, okay, well, yeah, we're going to put him in jail. We're going to go on with life. And, that sucks, but we're going to move on. How do you find the motivation? How do you find the will to continue in the face of some of the worst trauma that I've probably ever heard?
Yeah, it hasn't always been perfect. It hasn't always been easy. And I know that I have this like real positive outlook, but it hasn't always been like this. For a long time, I had very bad behavior. I was like sexually motivated with everything I did with women for a very long time. I had a victim mentality. I had the chip on my shoulder. Even when I went to basic training, I was like, you fucking people don't know who I am. Like, you don't, like, I'm tougher than everybody here. And I was like
Sure.
100, I was like 150 pounds.
You were
And
going
I
to
was,
punch a drill sergeant right in the face, huh?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I was a turd for a long time, and it has been a hell of a journey to get where I'm at. So just to be clear, I have not always been this freaking
Yeah,
hopeful about life. But what is, it's I eventually had to just own my situation. What happened was when I got married. And what's funny about being married is I told my wife like 3 months into knowing her, I was like, hey, I'm fucked up, just so you know. So like if you want to be with me, and we did the typical army shit, we got married in like 6 months of knowing each other. And so I told her, like, if you want to be married, yeah, if you want to be married, you're gonna have to deal with this shit, right? And that was not right of me to do, because that's a victim thing. That's a victim mentality. So every time I got mad, or every time something went wrong, or every time something happened in our marriage where I was like wanting to leave or break up or whatever, I put it on her. And I was just like, you chose this life, and that's such a bitch
sure.
move to do for men. And I'm getting
That's
over that.
unfair. That's an
Yeah,
unfair thing to do. Yeah.
right, right. And so I was like that for a long time. And I'm fixing it now. I honestly, the marriage part of it is like the last part of the healing portion that has happened for me. I've kind of put my marriage off, healing my marriage, and we've been married for like 8 years now, 7, 8 years. So to find the hope and all these different things, you have to own it first. You have to understand what happened to you happened, and truthfully, nobody really gives a shit. Like I can't walk into work every day and be like, hey guys, my childhood sucked. Everybody here owes me favors. Like, that's not how fucking life works, man. Unfortunately, it does not matter what you've been through. It is your responsibility to heal. And especially nowadays, there's so many resources, so many people to talk to. Um, you have to go and heal. And it's not everybody's responsibility to walk on eggshells around you. If you're not willing to own it and get out there and do the hard part, like you've already been through the hard shit, like talking to people, it is certainly hard, but that's just another thing you got to do. And when you go through suffering, you go through hard times, pain, trials, tribulations, it builds endurance. And endurance builds character. And character inspires hope. Character produces hope inside of you and inside of other people. If you have a hero, or you have a like the Marcus Luttrells or the Nick Lavery's, or these guys that are doing crazy shit in their lives and impacting other people, there's a reason why people follow them. It's because they've endured, they've gone through the suffering, they've endured, and that's built them to be the person they are today, to be able to provide that hope for other people. And once I realized that, like once that shit started clicking, I was like, oh shit, like my life can be, I can be the lighthouse, I can be the stoic like rock in the storm, with all the emotion and the turmoil around me and the tragedy around me. I can be that light. If it's raining and it's cloudy, you can still see me, and I'm here, and I'm standing up, and I'm proud, and I'm strong to let people see me and see what I'm doing. And I've been told this. I spoke at a school recently, and a guy who's 20 years older than me came up to me afterwards and told me he was molested as a kid. And he told me I was the first person in his entire life that he's told about that. And he's like, you're paving, you're laying down the carpet for others to walk. You're laying down that pathway for other people to find their voice and to find their path of healing. And in the last 3 months, man, like when you start to hear comments like that, it's like, okay, this is working. Like this means something. And it's a very important thing to talk about. Not a lot of people want to talk about it because it's very disturbing and hard to talk about, but it's happening to 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 4 boys. 70% of foster children are sexually exploited at some point in their lives. So it's happening, and we can't just turn a blind eye to it. So if I can get out there, if I would have had somebody like me walk into a school, somebody who's like a big, strong guy, looks like a man, walk into a school and say, go get some fucking help. Go talk to people. If there's something going on in your house, you don't owe it to your family to protect them. If there's something going on, you got to, it sucks, man. It's very hard to report. It's very hard to say these things. It's hard to, I don't talk about my mom and my dad and to put them under the bus or throw them under the bus. That's just part of my story, but if I could have said something when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, none of this shit would have happened. If I would have, when CPS came and talked to me when I was 6, 7,
Right.
8 years old, if I would have just said, like, I need some help, I got to get out of my mom's house, she's doing drugs, none of this would have happened. I possibly could have landed in a better situation and not had to deal with the problems that I had to deal with. On the flip side of that, I'm glad that I went through it because I made it through. There's so many kids who kill themselves. There's so many adults who kill themselves because of this pain and trauma. I'm glad I went through it because I was able to put the guy away. I stopped the cycle. I broke the freaking curse. And so at this point, it's my responsibility to pay it forward and just don't forget where I came from. There's somebody out there who needs help, and my message is helping.
Seth, the more people that hear your story, the better it's going to be. And I can't believe, the courage that you possess to come on here and tell this story. I definitely don't want to overtalk it. Can you tell us, everybody, where to find you? So let us know your Instagram. Let us know what your plans are. I know you have the book that's coming up soon, and we've already talked about that. But just for everybody out there that needs somebody to talk to, or that sees something in you that they might have in themselves, and they might need to communicate that, how do they get a hold of you?
Instagram is definitely the best way. Go Beyond the Shadows. If you look me up, follow, obviously message me. I'll freaking respond to everybody. Everybody gets a message back. And then I do have a website, sethgale.com. On there, you can find some things. I have a YouTube channel, which is Seth Gale, or Go Beyond the Shadows. Same thing there. My book will be out later this year, so follow me. I'll be posting about that once I get marketing graphics and official titles and things like that. And then I will speak anywhere and everywhere that'll listen to me. Like I said, 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 4 boys. And if you have an organization or a school, however many people are in there, my story impacts everybody. I've been through a lot, so or I can't say everybody, but it'll impact a lot of people. So
I'll say it'll impact everybody, Seth. Thanks for your service in the Army. Thanks for your willingness to deploy during an unsure time, and most of all, thank you for being willing and able to share your trauma in such a clear, concise, sometimes uncomfortable way. Man, I think it is important, and I think it's fair to say it would impact everybody that heard that story. So you can come back on whenever you want. Let's get you back on when you get that book out. Let's talk
yeah,
about it. We'll obviously help you get the word out about your book and about the Instagram. So I can't say thanks enough. Seth, thank you for sharing your story. Seth Gale, combat veteran, trauma survivor, and all around good man. We appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much.
yeah. Thanks, Aaron.